Hello, I'm Loren Sederstrom, and I'm the host of the All Around Grant Show. Some of what we've covered on the show. The Great Grant Tractor Parade and the GRP Float that has also been in several other parades, as well as some of the greenhouses in Grant, the apple orchards, some of the farm markets in Grant, pick your own blueberry fields, which we have close, some of the farms that are around, car shows that we frequent, as well as the cutter parades and so much more. So join me. Hello, I'm Loren Sederstrom, the host of the All Around Grant Show, and I have my co-host with me today, Diana Longery, former mayor of Maplewood and an attorney. Okay, today I'm going to do something different that we normally don't do. I'm taking some articles out of the newspaper. And because the east half of Grant is in the Stillwater School District, and the west half is in Mahtomedi, and there's been a lot of problems because Denise Pontrelli used to work in the Mahtomedi district. She was named superintendent of the Stillwater School District, and within 2 months after getting in, she completely changed their 5-year plan and decided to close down 3 schools in the north end, which is Withrow School, Marine on St. Croix School, and also the Oak Park School. So that was very, very, people were in an uproar about that. So this last election, they hired, the school board put 4 new people on. And they're no longer, there used to be a 5-2 majority supporting Pontrelli, now it's a 4-3 against her. And this has gotten very contentious because these northern schools were, Withrow School was one of the top 5 in the state, ranked. So in November, before the school board changed, they awarded her a 3-year extension on her contract.
So let me get this right, Mr. Sederstrom. What you're saying is that the outgoing school board members, knowing that they'd lost the election, decided to extend the disfavored superintendent's contract while they were still in office.
That's right. And what's interesting, the Oak Park School, I believe, was totally remodeled and put air conditioning in or just redone. And when Pontrelli came in, she decided, well, we're closing that and the administration is going to take that over. So they're going to get new digs. In November, they voted to expand this other school, which is Brookview School, Elementary School in Woodbury. The other crazy thing about this is the Stillwater School District extends across 94 into Woodbury. That should be the Woodbury School District, excuse me. So now you're running buses way down south because that's where a lot of the new homes are coming. Of course, this is Empire Building. So it's really interesting that when the old people, when they voted to add on, well, the 4 new people come in and they said, they changed since the November, they've changed. They're not opposed to the addition. I'm opposed to doing it now, so they put the finance off for another year. Of course, this is made the superintendent madder than a wet hen, and as I understand, she's disparaging the new members even to students. So it's kind of interesting. The Marine, Withrow, and Oak Park is what they closed, and it's really sad. They are going forward with a long-term facilities view, but I think, in my opinion, they should change the borders of the school district. Give Woodbury everything south of 94. So let Stillwater stay north. There's a lot of development happening in Lake Elmo, though when the houses are 500, 600, that's a starter home down there. I don't know how many young families you're going to get down there.
Right.
But the other thing I wanted to bring up, and it was on the other side of this, and some of you may or may not know, I have a background. I was an educator. I have a background in business and economics. As a matter of fact, I have an MED. The interesting thing is, we're talking with the economy. This has been the largest expansion in history. And you kind of like you take your temperature when you're going to be sick. Well, one of the things, a major economic determiner, is called the yield curve. And normally a long-term treasury bond earns more than a short-term. But when it reverses and the recession. It's a recession signal. So
you-
right
so
now,
you're saying that when the short-term bonds start producing more interest and more return than the long-term yield bonds, that actually is a signal of a recession that
That's
could
right.
occur. I see.
the Treasury bill yields 2.46%. That's 0.3% more than a yield and ones that matures in 10 years. And through history, every time there's a recession, like for example, in 06, 07, late 06 and early 07, the Great Recession, that's when the last time we had this type of thing going. So the Treasury yields have been falling, so it's pretty much the 10-year Treasury sunk to 2.43 from 3.20, so it's significant. And the other thing that's related to this is U.S. budget deficit hits an all-time high. Growth is going down. Of course, Trump's wonderful tax cut that went to the top. Oh, we're going to have expansion. Well, guess what? 50% of the tax savings, companies have bought back their own stock. They're not creating more jobs. They're just making their own stock worth more money. So this is posted a record budget deficit in February of it's of 5 months of the budget up 39% from a year ago. An all-time high for February, a $234 billion deficit. So we see which way that's going, and you know, the stock market's up and down, it's gambling, you know, but there are some things that are leading economic indicators that do tell us which way they're going. So I'm done with that. I just had to put my 2 cents in. So it's called a bull market when it's increasing. It's a bear market when it's going down. Okay, now we're shifting gears. Now, Diane and I both used to be at SCC in White Bear before they closed the public comment down, and it was an award-winning cable system. They had so many awards.
Right, public access.
Public access. And a very robust public access. Ironically, our current mayor was on the board, and he was instrumental in getting rid of it, just like Maplewood, because they didn't like the daylight that was being shown on all the different shows and the stuff that's going on. So let's play the first clip about our wonderful mayor at the Cable Commission.
And this is at a recent Cable Commission meeting,
yes,
right?
Yes, this last month.
Right, okay.
2 weeks ago. If we could play that, please.
I'd appreciate it if the executives up here, Mr. Finity, Ms. Pokravic, Ms. Vrent, if we could just move past this. We have done this so many times. Let's stop wasting time. Let's get through our agenda and get moving here. Thank you.
All right.
Now there he was complaining about people coming and talking. They have a public comment section at the Cable Commission. Now I was on the Cable Commission for a couple of years, so I'm familiar with it. Then I also had a cable show, so I was fairly knowledgeable about what was happening. The other bone of contention in this situation, every cable commissioner gets a $200 a month cable package for free. They're not given a 1099. That's $2,400 a year in a freebie. They should be 1099 when they get that. If you're on the Xcel Energy board, they don't give you free electricity. And the ironic thing is there's nothing that they can control with that major package. All they can do is they could see what was on public television before, but now they got rid of 14 and 15. The only thing they have is a government channel, and it's turned out to be pretty much a joke. Nobody watches it anymore. The sad thing is 14 was a religious channel, and a lot of older people in the winter wouldn't get out, but they could watch their church on cable. Okay, let's go to the next one if we could. It's the mayor at the Cable Commission.
More than that. And I think being responsible, maybe we should look at that a little bit harder. Jim's point about other things going on, we do have a closed session tonight regarding pending litigation. I don't think that's a secret for anyone here, and that could have serious implications for the commission as a whole. And perhaps it would be better to get the reasoning in place for the truck, handle our pending litigations here, and then sort of jump on that and explore the question.
Karen.
Well, part of the litigation was about the 1099s and them not having to say that this is something I've received. And
So
if it's,
is somebody suing them with regard to that
well,
issue?
that's what I'd heard. There's some rumblings I've heard saying that cable may not be around that much longer, which would be unfortunate. I don't have the clips of the speakers at this particular last Cable Commission meeting, but they were saying you got rid of all the shows that the people were watching. Many of us had shows there, weekly shows. Mine was monthly. A lot of people watched it. Of course, I have mine on YouTube, and when I can get it on there, don't have a problem. Okay, let's go. Let me set this next piece up. And I couldn't get it honed down to exactly what it is, but Larry Lanou and we lobbied the Capitol for a bill called No School on a Dump Site. Minnesota now has 12 schools on dump sites. And the problem with that, and I've worked with Aaron Brockovich and Bob Baucox, when young people they're not fully developed immune systems and they're much more susceptible to these things. They built Wildwood School on a former Superfund site, and as a result, 53 parents have pulled their children from Wildwood School because they have headaches and nosebleeds, and 2 of the teachers have had cancer. Now they're talking about building a hockey arena on a municipal waste site that's 30 feet deep, and there's a restricted covenant within the deed that says it can't be done. But the MPC is signing off anyway. But Kathy Lomer used to be the Republican representative for the 39B district. She lost her seat. I wasn't impressed with her either. We were down and she gave us just tepid support for the No School in a Dump Site. And it said you couldn't build any more schools within a quarter mile of a dump site, but if a school was built on a dump site, you must notify parents. And I actually testified in committee, Education Policy Committee. Karen Housley had me do the speaking. And all they would have to do was put a sentence in this newsletter that's required by law to talk about environmental, asbestos, mold type of things. Just put one sentence that said, Wildwood School was built on a former Superfund site, so the parents could make a knowledgeable decision and decide whether or not they wanted their children on that site. Because usually it takes 10 to 15 years before the cancer develops. So I'm just gonna play a little bit of this, but we're not gonna do the whole 5 minutes. At the end, she basically says she isn't going to support this bill. She doesn't know about it. She think about it, and which really shocked us. So anyway, if we could play a little bit of this clip, please.
You know, our calendars are booked to the 10 minutes. Some of our meetings take place walking through the tunnel. We plan them with minutes on our calendar, walk through the tunnel to our next community meeting. We could talk to a constituent on the way. So Ryan, our majority leader, with Loren, will not be here till 9:01.
Went to one of her meet and greets and we talked, and she basically said she didn't know if she'd support it or not. We need both Republican and Democrat supporters to get this bill through. The beauty of this bill is it doesn't really cost anything, but it gives transparency and information to those individuals that have children. And like we say, their immune systems aren't fully developed and they're more susceptible to diseases. So I think it's an important thing, but obviously it wouldn't be heard this session, it'll be next session. Bob Detmer and Karen Housley were the sponsors of it last time, and they're kind of backing away on that. But so now we're gonna shift gears and go back to Grant. I was on the council. I was just voted into retirement in November, and so my last meeting was December. The 4 years that I was on the council, one of the things I did was push for road policy change. And we'll have a clip on the mayor explaining this policy later. And it's interesting how realtors put a spin on these things. They're saying that, oh, this is bottom up, and
and when you say it, that realtors put a spin on these things, the reason you're saying that is because the mayor, the current mayor, and one of the current council members are both realtors.
The former mayor, Tom Carr, and the current mayor are real estate agents.
Yes.
And you know, if an atom bomb goes off across the street, look at the potential. That could be the basement for a skyscraper. and it's real interesting. And they're, oh yeah, this is democracy at its best, and it's bottom up, and people decide if they want it. And they had a thing where people would have to pay for a feasibility study.
And this is under the old policy,
the old
correct?
policy,
Yeah.
$3,000 to $5,000 for a study. And then if you got 75% of the neighbors to sign on, they would go ahead and decide whether or not they were going to do it. Well, a couple of these had 72%. And what would happen was there's 3 or 4 people that didn't want it, and it would tip the scale so they didn't get it done. And not only that, only the people on that road would pay for it. Now they're going to be changing this policy, you know, because let's say you have a feeder road with 30 homes on this side and 50 homes on this side, and there's only 10 homes on the feeder road. Well, the 10 homes in the feeder road would pick up the full tab for fixing the road, so each of them may have to pay $10,000 or $20,000 a piece. So that's an issue. The other issue was when they say redo a road, what do they exactly mean? And that's nebulous, and they're going to have to get to go at that too. But we're going to be covering that more extensively than we have before. So if we could play 731, please, we'll talk in the other.
Bit of history on this real quick before Brad launches into this. As many of you know, the City of Grant has for years pushed our authority down toward the citizens. So unlike other cities, you might be sitting in your house in Montemita, in Pine Springs, in another surrounding community, and the mailman comes, you go out to the mailbox, and what do you have? You have a letter that says, congratulations, you're being assessed for your street. You had no input into it, no real input, and you get the letter, and it's time to have your street assessed. Grant has been very different from that for quite some time, in the sense that we've pushed that authority down to the citizenry, where we would encourage them to do a petition. And once a petition got a number of signatures, and that has varied, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about here in a moment, on our streets, once that petition reached a certain level, then a feasibility study would be placed into process. That would happen, and then the residents who signed and those who didn't sign, if it met that threshold, would then have a set of costs to consider. If they chose to do so, the city would then go ahead and, in many cases, bond for that and have that street done. Now, we've run into some difficulties with this process, even though I think most of our residents appreciate the fact that instead of top-down governance, we've allowed that type of assessment policy to come up. And it's worked quite well on.
Okay, let me ask you, you were the mayor. Is this the way assessments work? They just magically appear in your mailbox?
They do not. No, they do not. When I heard that, I really felt like scratching my head, because there's actually state laws that talk about how special assessments, especially for road reconstruction projects, how they can be assessed. And there's got to be public hearings, and it doesn't just happen. You don't just get an invoice in your mailbox. The city council decides on if a road's going to be done, and then they have a public hearing where then they hear from the residents. You have an opportunity that you can object. You can actually object to then if the project goes through and you think the assessment amount is incorrect, or you think that the way that the assessment was done, the method, that you can object and you can actually bring it to district court and have it thrown out. And the reason I know that is because I've actually done that for a number of clients where we have questioned either the method of the special assessment or we have questioned the amount of the special assessment. The first question about the method is a constitutional question, and the question about the amount of the assessment has to do with how it has, whether or not if that amount is proportionate to the increase in the market value of the property as a result of that project, that
Let
road
me ask you
improvement
another
project.
question. How about major thoroughfares? Was there any difference in funding? So for example, say there's, like say, example, White Bear Avenue. Say, assuming it wasn't a county road. If it was a city road and it's a major thoroughfare, is that assessed different than just a residential street?
Well, it again does depend upon what type of road it is, because if it's a county road, then the city doesn't do anything with it. And like in Ramsey County, for instance, Ramsey County does not assess special assessments for the people living along county roads. So if you're looking to buy a house in Maplewood, for instance, and you want to avoid all special assessments for road reassessments in the future, provided Ramsey County doesn't change their policy, you'll buy a house on a county road.
Well, how about main thoroughfares that are not county roads? Are
Well-
they assessed any different than a residential one that's just a back street?
No.
Okay.
And so you've got, like, say, a good example is Frost Avenue, which is a major thoroughfare in Maplewood, and that is currently being considered for a road reconstruction project. And yes, there are going to be special assessments along there, but it's supposed to be consistent with the special assessment policy that we have in Maplewood, and that is that residential properties are taxed at a different rate than commercial properties are. So it depends on what type of property you have. And residential single-family home properties are assessed differently than a property that has an apartment on it, for instance. So that again will be a factor in that determination of assessment.
Okay, well, let's go to the next clip then, and we'll talk on the other side.
Recommendations for changes to the current city's special assessment policy in a resolution 2019-06 for your consideration. The staff is recommending these changes. The current special assessment policy, I should state, is adopted as resolution 2010-11. The staff's recommended changes would supplement or provide more detail for the current city's special assessment policy. For the current city's special assessment policy, the city or the staff has noted 7 changes that they would recommend for the council's consideration. And at this point, I guess I would like to either maybe go one by one, Mayor, or maybe just read off the list, and then we can answer questions after the fact.
Why don't you read off the list for us, Brad, real quick, and I'm sure some of the councilmen up here are then going to kind of want to ask you some questions on each of those and see if we can get a little more explanation on them. So why don't you just go ahead and just give us a quick summary of each of those and read
Sure.
down that list for us if you would.
Sure. So
Okay, well, it sounds like he got off to sort of a rough start there, and that's the city engineer in talking about special assessments. So I guess he's going to read from his cheat sheet as to what those
And
changes are, huh?
What concerns me about this, and we're doing something a little different on this one, is we're going to have him read through this. I believe it's 1 minute and 11 seconds, how long the clip lasts, and he goes so fast you can't understand it. But we're going to put on the screen the 7 changes that they're talking about, and we can discuss them individually. So if we could please, the next clip, please.
to the project. Second one, no special assessments will be levied against the city of Grant unless the owned property meets the definition of a buildable lot. The new policy defines the term reconstruct for all roadways in terms of improving its section or surface. The new policy defines the term project to encompass all roadway segments ordered by council into a single project. The special assessments are allocated on a per-project basis. The new policy would include paved roads as part of the procedures, and the city agrees to initially pay for the cost of the feasibility report. So with that, I guess I would entertain any questions from the council.
Right.
Now, if we can put up that list of the 7 things that we've written out so we can discuss them a little bit better.
And Mr. Sederstrom, while we're doing that, what I think is important really to call out to the viewers is that at the City of Grant, they have used an overhead projector in the past during council meetings, haven't they? In order to be able to show for people who are in the audience or who are watching through the cable casting what is being talked about. And yet here is a very important policy that they didn't even bother putting it up on the overhead projector so that people could follow along to know what was being discussed.
Control room, if we could put that up, please. City may apply budgeted road maintenance money in special projects. Okay, so in other words, if they have $200,000 that they have for maintaining roads, they're saying, well, we can take 100 or 150 and put it on this particular road. You won't get usually they used to say, well, if you're gonna get seal coating and it's $7,000, we'll apply that $7,000 to getting your road rebuilt. And it's probably only $90,000, but you know, it's kind of a joke.
When you're saying that the city may apply budgeted road maintenance into special projects, you're saying that they do have some dollars that they've set aside for maintenance, but then they can put that into the special projects to help pay for those special projects. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, a lot of implications for these, and there's a lot of significant changes. The next one is no special assessment unless the lot is buildable. In Grant, they changed it a number of years ago. Minimum size of lot is 5. And there has to be a 10-acre average if there's development. Well, there's quite a few lots, not quite a few, but there's several lots in Grant. There are 2.5-acre lots, and somebody owns both of them. And after the fact, somebody wants to build in the second 2.5-acre lot. Now, they're not going to be assessed for that. They're only going to be assessed for the one lot. So, okay, let's go back to the list again.
Okay, and this is reconstruction means improving the roadway or the surface, and that there's 3 categories.
Okay.
So I think that's, you mentioned that they didn't have very good definition about what reconstruction meant.
Well,
and now they've defined it by 3 different categories.
Well, it could be a patch. It could be just an overlay. It could be a mill and overlay. But if you go to a total reconstruction where you're taking the asphalt up, you're putting a new bed down there, the conundrum with that is you then have to bring the ditches and everything else up to standard. So you're talking a reconstruction can be 4 times as expensive as a mill and overlay.
Right.
An example of that was McCusick Road's about 2 miles long, and it's got about 6 inches of asphalt. Before the county turned it back over to Grant, they did an overlay. And it's broken up. They spend $25,000 a year patching that road. Now, when I was on the council, I worked with, 3 years ago, I worked with Phil Olson, and we had a plan where we could mill and overlay it for $135,000 and would last it 10 to 15 years. Minimal 15 years. Well, the city wouldn't do it. Now, there's a stretch, a 300 stretch of road in front of Carr and Huber's driveways. It's been there for over 10 years, and there isn't a chip in it. The rest of the road is falling apart. It's like you're driving over a small mountain range. But again, there are different types of things, some stopgap. Later on, it's really interesting that they're finally admitting in one of the clips that the roads are falling apart.
And one thing I think that it's important to mention here is that depending upon what type of road work you're talking about, and you did touch on this a little bit, depending upon the type of road work you're contemplating, will trigger or not trigger certain other requirements under other laws that have nothing to do so much with the residents, but has more to do with the types of compliance that the city must obey. For instance, if you have a total reconstruction of a roadway, that typically will trigger the requirements that you need to fully treat that stormwater runoff off of that street. And so that might require, as you mentioned, regrading the ditches. It might require the addition of rainwater gardens. It might require a whole lot of other things because you have that condition of having to account for that stormwater runoff. Whereas if you do a mill and overlay, it doesn't trigger the same compliance issues. And that's something that, when I was mayor of Maplewood, was actually not disclosed to the council when I was on there until a couple years went by. They always said we had to do all these total reconstruction projects, and we kept saying, well, why can't we do a mill and overlay? And then finally, eventually, it came out, well, yeah, I guess we could do mill and overlay, but then we won't be able to do all of our rain gardens, because see, then they could build all that into the costs and into the project. And so they really wanted to do the big projects that required all these other compliance things so they could hire more of their buddies, rather than do the mill and overlay, which you've indicated can be very
Cost effective.
cost effective and very good for the road, and be just as good.
Let's put this slip back up again. We'll go to the next one.
Several single repairs can be ordered into a single project.
Okay, the significance of that is, if there's 3 roads that need 3 things, now they're saying, hey, we're gonna lump it together and we're just gonna do it. Well, before they would have to consider each one and go through all this hoopla. This way, it gives them carte blanche for what they want to do. Anything that they can come up with, they can say, this is a project. And I can tell you there's a project coming up soon. Joliet is terrible. These guys are changing the road policy because guess what? They live on it. And if there's 10 people living on this road, and there's 70 people in Woodland Acres and 30 people in Victoria Station, they're going to have to pay the full boat. But now they're changing the policy to include those 100 people. So instead of spreading the cost over 10 people, it goes over 110. Gee whiz, are they saving themselves some money? Let me think about that. Let's do my math. So that's what's coming up. Okay, let's put it back up, and they're bundling road projects,
Yes.
and so they can just call it a project, and they can slip anything under there that they want to.
Right. Next, we have special allocations. Next, we have special allocations on a per project basis.
Okay, this is tying just to what we talked about. Gee whiz, how much you want to bet they're going to have a special allocation so the mayor and deputy mayor pay next to nothing? They're going to allocate it so it gets them off the hook. Joliet is one of those roads that's been bad. They've had surveys. It's just I don't know, it's terrible. It looks like a war scene. There's so many potholes.
So you're saying, in other words, that they can look beyond just that particular street, but look at the neighborhoods that are served by that street in order to do what they call special
And
allocations.
how coincidental that when this road is coming up, they're getting themselves off the hook.
Right.
Gee whiz, am I cynical? Probably. But you go to the next one.
Include paved roads in projects.
Well, before they were obsessed with dirt roads, and you have to do things to the dirt road every once in a while. They call putting a lift. And what it has is there's clay and gravel, and the clay acts as a binder or a glue. And so every so many years, you got to go put a new lift on the dirt roads. And they had nothing in the ordinances about doing anything to the asphalt roads. If you wanted it fixed other than the patch, you had to pay for it. So that's where that's coming from.
Okay.
Then there's one more thing in there I believe we have.
And that is, the city will pay for feasibility studies.
Well, can you imagine the people along Jeffrey? They had wanted to get it paved. It's a dirt road that kind of goes along the Gateway Trail, and it gets used quite a bit. And they had to put up the $3,000 or $4,000. The residents themselves had to write checks out so they could get the $4,000 up to do the feasibility study. Then they did the feasibility study, and there were 1 or 2 people short of making the 75% threshold. They had 71%. Too bad, you lost your money, we're not doing anything.
Right.
And so now they're saying that the city will pick up the feasibility study. Gee whiz. Now let's get back to the mayor and deputy mayor. Are they going to have to kick in for a feasibility study now? Oh, I guess not, because the policy changed. Imagine that.
And I will say, though, that in most communities that I'm aware of, the city does pay for the feasibility study because it's for the good of the overall community. It's part of what the city government is responsible for, is for the maintenance of their city roads and taking care of things. But in this case, it's the timing that you find suspect, not the fact that the city is now going to be in line with other cities and pay for feasibility studies, but more having to do with the timing of it, because they could have certainly have made this change back 3-4 years ago when you were on the council, when you suggested the same.
Well, I was harping on road policy for 4 years, explaining that major arteries should be covered by the city.
Yes.
And it's not coming around until somebody else is going to get a bill. Oh, it's going to hit my pocket. Maybe we'll change things. I'm amazed that they don't require hitching posts for horses or something. This is how backwards these people are. But that's it. Now we're going to talk about the feasibility report. We'll do a clip on that.
It's fine as far as the term reconstruct, as far as this goes. But when we get to the actual resolution, I think we need a couple more definitions so that I think it's easier for communication between the residents and for the council that we start talking. When we say reconstruct, what does that mean? I don't care how we number them. We can call it 1, 2, 3, reconstruct 1, reconstruct 2, reconstruct 3. We could call it total reconstruction. We can call it partial reconstruction, and we can call it patch and overlay. I don't care. But I think we need to have an understanding, and then what that means. I mean, total reconstruction, you're going to have what stormwater, studies, and I mean, it's crazy. You know better than I do. I know, and I think the residents are going to want to know what that means and what the costs are. So I think just for our own, sake, to have the definitions defined somewhere, whether it's in this resolution, and Brad and I talked about that, or somewhere, we need to have definitions on what these different options mean.
All I can say to that is daylight in the swamp. Finally, these people, after fighting tooth and nail, this isn't road policy, that isn't road policy. We've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it on many, many of our clips. That's not the road policy. I'm off the council, and what are they doing? They're finally taking my words to heart. Okay, let's go to the next clip if we could.
Was to be more general in what reconstruct meant. Now, we've covered all the items that Tom spoke of, the reconstruct, the overlays, the reclaiming, the drainage improvements, all that, all those improvements are part of the reconstruct. Now, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't get down to the details until you get into the feasibility report, and we can make the cost basis for each one of those improvements and let the residents, kind of provide feedback on which option they would prefer to use.
Absolutely.
Well, finally, again, one of the complaints we've had, and we're going to talk about this transparency and voice in the community. Finally, they're going to be giving the community somewhat of a voice. You're going to have somewhat of a choice. You're not going to have an engineer come and say, this is what you need. They spend thousands of dollars rating the roads and know where they are. And we've had clips on before about that our current road policy is not sustainable because we keep getting further and further behind. In another 5 years, every asphalt road's going to have to be rebuilt. And it just amazes me the 180-degree change that I'm seeing. And it's positive. But I think me poking them with a stick for 4 years, they're finally saying, oh, I wonder what that is. So let's go to the next clip and we'll go from there.
It would be okay with using that report the second time and actually going forward with that.
Yeah, as long as nothing is really
Drastically
changed in
Okay.
the area or, I don't-
Washouts or anything.
Right, I don't know that there's any statutes of limitations on a feasibility report. Maybe the city
Well, then I
attorney
wonder,
can-
just turning to
chime
Mr.
in on
Schneider
that.
for a moment, whether or not the city
I
could
don't know
establish a
any.
policy that in absence of materially different conditions, the city would reuse feasibility studies for 3 years, 4 years, 5?
Well, no, that's an interesting question to say, well, let's say in that instance where you had the example, I think you said on Jeffrey, that the residents, they paid for a feasibility study, but then it turned out that the road didn't get redone because there weren't enough people on the who signed the petition. So this idea that maybe that feasibility study could still be valid even though it's several years later, would open the window that then these folks who have paid for that feasibility study could still rely upon it, the city could rely upon it, and then that road could get done. Potentially then, if those feasibility studies, like say for instance that one that was completed for Jeffrey, because they were asking the city attorney whether or not if they can rely on that even several years later, well then they could conceptually pull that feasibility study that's already been done, and a couple years later, then now the city can say, we've already got a feasibility study, so now we can move forward on the road.
Yep, and well, this is going to grease the skids for future road, because if people come together, they don't have to write a check before they
Yes.
get anything.
Right.
So that's, here's something important too, which we're coming up with the next clip, and we'll talk on the other side. This is very significant change.
If certain residents wanted to do that, as Dave said, and he warns us that if residents want updated numbers and we were to have challenges under Minnesota state law, if the assessment does not provide the benefit to the property of the assessment, obviously these can be challenged. So in most cases, you'd think that we wouldn't have a problem with that type of legal challenge, but on a case-by-case basis, and that's something we're gonna have to work on. You bring up great points, I'm just not quite sure where to go with that yet, other than on a case-by-case basis, engaging with these folks and making sure that we understand their particular situations.
We're talking about a feasibility waiver. So they would get people to sign a waiver in terms to the feasibility study so they could go ahead with it.
And keep in mind a feasibility study, at least the way that we use feasibility studies in Maplewood, didn't so much go into the benefit that was provided to the properties as a result of the project. What was the increase in their market value as a result of the project? That's not really what the feasibility study focused on. The feasibility study focused on a lot of the engineering of about what was required and what is the budgeting, and more having to do with the project itself, not actually looking at that legal analysis as to the benefit conferred upon the property to justify what the assessment would be. So that's why I'm a little confused, because it sounds like he's thinking the feasibility study actually is what does that determination of what the benefit is to the properties along the project. And generally that is done more by appraisal methods, not a feasibility study.
Well, what's interesting is about 6 or 7 years ago, we actually had a small section of road in Grant. It was a circle. They turned back into gravel. But let's go to there. Now they're talking about council discretion. That's the next thing we're going to talk about, which I maintain we could have all along, but we'll talk on the other side.
Want to do this, let's say it's 60 or 65%. One or two people out of 5 or 6, and maybe they're selling for whatever reason they don't want to. If that particular project makes sense to most of the residents and to the city and to the area, I'd still like to see the council have the option to push that forward if it's less than 75%. Now, I don't know what verbiage you want in there.
Yeah, and that was part of me setting this up in the beginning, was saying that we've pushed this authority down and down to the residents, and unfortunately, because of the way that we've structured this, some of these can be blocked pretty easily, and if we're at a 75% threshold and the council basically delegates the power away from ourselves and we may only partially or fully reject it, I would suggest to the council and want some council feedback on the fact that I think we should put a line in here that the council's discretion on this shall rule. In other words, I think the council, using, good hard common sense and the costs on these projects and considering all other factors should be able to order these.
I think that the council does have, obviously, discretion to vote a project up or down, because that's why they're taking a vote on it. But they also do have to be cognizant of what the state law requires as well, because there are formulas with regard to how much of that project is being paid for by the residents versus how much is being paid for by bonding, and that triggers certain requirements of what the city needs to maintain and to meet when it comes to actually setting what that assessment amount is going to be. So they can exercise their discretion within understanding what the law requires, and that's why they've got to have an attorney give them guidance on that.
The implication of this is the underpinning of what it used to be. They never wanted to fix the road unless everybody picked up. Now, but you see, if you look at what they're doing through this road policy, they're making substantial changes. They're saying that the city can now pay for it and it's not all the residents. They're also saying they can bundle a project. And this is all aimed at that Joliet project. It's been named as a project for the last 3 years. Now that it's coming to fruition, the mayor and deputy mayor don't want to be on the hook for the 10% of it.
Right, and keep in mind,
because there's 70 homes over here, there's 30 over here. Now, all of a sudden, the shoe's on the other foot, because it's going to cost them money, and how can we get around paying them? Before they wouldn't consider this. Oh, that's too bad. It's like not in my backyard type of thing.
Yes, but from a public policy standpoint, under the old road policy that the city of Grant had, where it's approved if the residents have petitioned for it and they're paying for it, under that public policy, the city would never, from my understanding, would never be subject to special assessment appeals. They would never end up in court with regard to somebody challenging the assessment for the road project because they asked for it themselves.
Yeah, well, I understand that, but what I'm trying to do is connect the dots and show how the shoe's on the other foot and why they're changing the road policy. Let's go to the next, and now they want to make this stronger. It's the black letter of the law. We'll talk on the other side.
It'll have gone all the way. My point is this. We get into a large project in a large neighborhood, and we've got this feeder street, and this feeder street, this feeder street, these cul-de-sacs, and if economy of scale means if I add this neighborhood to the rest of this, everybody's drops from 5,000 to 4,350, so the economy of scales are relatively huge. I don't want to have to go through this and say, well, it's at 63.75%, I can't order that. What I'm trying to do is make sure that the council has the ability to order, to actually just order at whatever percentage there is, economy of scales into projects. So what I'm saying is I want to claw that back a little bit to the council and say, in certain instances, this council may look at a project that's going forward that Brad has put a lot of time and effort into, the economy of scale is there, and whatever the petition amount is, the council retains that ability in black letter law.
You noticed how we talked about the road and the spreading the project. Again, that's the piece about bundling several pieces into one project. They are putting the pieces together here without saying it to allow them to have the power to do this particular project. And it's a 180-degree turnaround from what it was. Now we're going to go to the next clip, and they're finally admitting about falling behind in the roads. And I've talked about this for 4 years till I was blue in the face. Okay, let's play that clip.
Smaller roads, the maintenance is falling behind. And here's even a little more history. My house is an average house in Grant. It's about $500,000. Fine, $500,000 market value. You take that $500,000 market value, you go into Montemita, you go into Pine Springs, go anywhere else. Their city taxes, I pay about $600 for City of Grant. Their city taxes in any of those neighboring cities are 900 to 1,300, okay?
3 times that.
They're almost 3 times the city taxes that you pay in Grant. Now, we've pushed this power down to the citizenry, but we need to pull some of it back because we are starting to lose the maintenance on some of these minor roads, and they're gonna cost us more the longer we wait. So this is not a power that would be used at least during my tenure up here.
Well, I just learned some new math. 3 times 600 is 1,300. I didn't know that before. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Well, maybe he's into real estate, but the math isn't so strong. We'll
No,
see.
maybe he went to a school where they taught new math.
Yes, it sounds like it. But they're finally admitting they're falling behind on the road. I was swinging off the chandeliers explaining this, that the sooner you fix them, well, you don't want to do a total reconstruct. Mills and overlays last 15 to 20 years. They're cost effective. It's just insane. Well, that's enough on the roads. We've kind of beat that to death with a stick, but I did want to point out how they're tacitly changing the road policy to get Joliet done so it doesn't cost them what would have cost other residents to have their roads done.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, now we're going to talk about the wedding barn. And this was very contentious. There was a clip in here I was going to include, but I couldn't. I was going to throw up. Because they changed this so people can have commercial venues on county roads. The wedding barn, the guy came up and it was going to be a 96 in Manning. He was going to started. He wanted a little restaurant. Well, they changed the law for it. Oh yeah, we should be able to do. They have events. We have this, have that. The guy comes back in with 2 5,000 square a restaurant in a not a convention center, but a place where you have
Like a banquet center?
banquet center and all this crap.
And that was a couple years ago,
A couple
correct?
years ago, and the only reason it didn't go in, the guy who sold his bar, he was 62, he went in for the small business loan and they found out he had a brain cancer. So that got shot down, but we'd have one of those. Now I have 43 acres, 2 20-acre parcels, so I was thinking of maybe I'd have a strip club, and I'm kidding. I have a horse farm and it's not gonna change. Let's go to the wedding barn clip.
As 11 to 10 p.m. So in response to the neighbors and what they heard, they have shifted those hours back to 8 p.m. and that is their request this evening. Friday and Saturday evening, the permit is written today that the site must be dark by 11 p.m. They're essentially asking for an additional half hour on those Friday and Saturday evenings. So all dark by 11:30 p.m. is the request this evening. And Sundays, they have withdrawn their request for any events on Sundays, and that also being in response to what they heard during public testimony.
Well, the wedding barn went in about 3-4 years ago. And you have to understand, it's on the south side of the county road is the old Gadboy farm with the big barn. That's what they're turning into the wedding barn. It's south facing. That's where the stanchions were downstairs. They're using the upstairs. Well, the trouble across the road, it probably goes straight up like about 100 feet. And these people up on the hill were complaining they weren't supposed to have the doors open. People go out, open the doors, the decibels loud. They had multiple complaints. And as you know, noise travels at a 45-degree angle. If you're on the ground, you're straight in front of it, isn't so bad. I used to live in Golden Valley. My first floor was 35 feet above the road. Believe me, in December, when a semi-truck went down Plymouth Avenue, which is I overlooked, it sounded like the thing was driving through my living room. It was that loud. So some of those poor people have just put up with so much grief, and this was slipped in under that special event center thing, and now the guy wants to put a deck the width of the barn on the south side. Well, the noise isn't going to be contained at all. And he keeps adding for more and more, and they ultimately turn it down. But that's one of the things I did want to talk about. And they went through quite a bit of stuff on the meeting. They turned down the extension of hours. They said, hey, you can do the 10 to 6. You're not going to do 11 to 8 because And that makes sense. He can have 52 events. In the last few years, he's had between 45 and 47. So, and yes, he's invested some things, but he refuses to put soundproofing in the barn. It's all the old barnwood. Well, that's fine. He also has refused to put an airlock entry, so when people open the door, they go into an entryway, and the door shuts, then they open another door and go in where the noise is.
Well, and a double entry sounds like that would make a lot of sense, and keeping the noise in the barn and not coming out every time somebody's opening the door.
Yep, because the doors are on the north side, because the south side is two-story, and if you go in, that's where the stanchions are, and that isn't where the party is. So anyway, here's play the next clip.
Identified this within your staff report this evening. We acknowledge and understand that there were quite a few sort of growing pains, for lack of a better way of saying it, through their first year of operations. Staff, including the building official, worked with them, the city engineer, and everybody else to try to get the permit up to snuff and get the site work done so that it complied with that permit. By early 2015, many of the issues had been resolved. We did not receive any additional formal complaints until 2018. In that case, the owners were contacted to resolve the issues. What we've heard most frequently is with respect to the large barn doors on the north side, that they are open at times during operations, and particularly when there is music on the dance floor, and that can be heard on properties that are surrounding the site. I would note that during the public hearing and public testimony, there was some testimony given that folks in the neighborhood believe that those doors have been open more than have been formally complained or filed. However, staff would note that without the formal complaint, we really can't say a whole.
Well, what's interesting is they did not allow public comment at this meeting. Now, when you were the mayor, if there was a major change or conditional use permit, et cetera, coming up, did you have public comment at the regularly scheduled city council meeting?
I did, and actually what I did when I was mayor, because I felt it was important to hear from residents on all issues, not even just those that seemed to me to be important, is that before we took the vote, I opened up the floor actually to all issues before the vote was taken.
Well, it's interesting because, as we've talked about before, they have public comment, but you can't comment on anything on the agenda, and it's not videotaped. So if there's a pothole in Joliet you want to warn somebody about, nobody else is going to know about it until they hit it.
And technically, your public comment that they have before the meetings like that, which are not cable cast, those are supposed to be items that are not on the agenda as well.
Yes.
So it's not even about items that are on the agenda. So if you're there in the audience and you want to talk about something on the agenda, you don't even have the forum to do that at all, unless they suddenly decide they want to open it up. And from what I can see, they never open it up in the city of Grant.
Well, they usually don't. Let's play the next clip, please. And this is
we
an
need
audience
to do, or
comment.
that we can do, that might be bothersome to them, and they're not bothered by it. I mean, about our closest neighbor, Carl Swanson, is usually here for these meetings. He's never been bothered a bit by any noise.
Where does Carl live?
Up on the hill, on the highest. Just east.
Ma'am.
Just east of me, up on the hill.
So he's east of you up on
Yeah.
So you see, somebody wanted to comment, and he shut them down right now. There was no comments on this allowed at all.
And that was the owner of the wedding barn, correct?
Yes.
That was speaking, okay.
And, okay, that's enough with that. I wanted to point out, there's no transparency, no public comment. They're trying to throttle everybody, you know. And the last thing is, you know, I applied for the Public Planning Commission, and now they just reappointed people without any hearings or anything, so that's what the last one is about.
To reappoint planning commissioners Helander and, Schaefer?
Schaefer.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
I would second.
All those in favor of,
Well,
whoop.
Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry, Tom.
Clarification from the administrator, do we have
Yeah.
to do this?
Do
Should we
it one
do
at
this
a time.
individually? Yeah.
One motion is fine.
One motion, okay?
Just double
Very
check.
good. All those in favor of the reappointment of Helander and Schaefer, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
There we go. They got all the cronies in they want. Everything's a yes man. It's a big love fest every time they have a planning commission meeting or a city council meeting.
So is now the entry into the era of tranquility,
Yeah.
correct?
As long as we don't let the citizens participate. Well, that's about it for the show. Thank you for joining me. You always give a lot of good information. And next month, we'll bring some more issues and let you know what's going on all around in Grant.